Welcome back, life science learners, to this segment. In our segment, we're going to continue with the nitrogen cycle. It's important that we have an understanding of how nitrogen is cycled in the environment. As I mentioned, nitrogen is a very important element in the building blocks of many organic compounds. One crucial compound is proteins. We also know that DNA and RNA are important organic compounds that are essential for organisms to be able to survive and pass on genetic information. Let's look at the various processes involved in the nitrogen cycle. We also want to unpack what is the human impact. Let me go back to that. What is the human impact on the nitrogen cycle? And so that's important for us to be able to recognize, and what is the influence that that could have on the atmosphere and other living organisms. And so there are various things that humans carry out in terms of activities that influence the nitrogen cycle and upset that balance. It's important that we recognize that the balance of nutrients in the environment need to be maintained naturally, importantly, because these are crucial to the existence of all life forms. So let's get straight into the nitrogen cycle and let's try and unpack the various different processes in it. As I mentioned, the nitrogen cycle, the crucial fixation process is called lightning. And lightning, again, has the ability to be able to take nitrogen gas and change that into nitrates when the energy from the lightning is able to fuse the nitrogen and the oxygen in the atmosphere together to form nitrates. Again, that is being able to fix the nitrogen gas into nitrates using lightning. And we see that being a significant amount of energy available to do this. The next process is the absorption of these nitrates. So ammonia and nitrates are absorbed by plants through their roots. As I mentioned earlier on, we have bacteria called nitrogen fixing bacteria. And these bacteria, as you look at these images here, are able to take in and absorb the atmospheric nitrogen and convert that into nitrates and ammonia, which is then available to the plants for processes that they need, such as protein synthesis. So we know that that's an important process of being able to absorb the nitrates and the ammonia. The next process is ingestion. Ingestion is basically the process of digestion where consumers such as animals, humans, and herbivores consume the plants, and in that process take in the proteins. We also know that other consumers, such as your secondary consumers, eat other herbivores or other secondary consumers, and in turn access the proteins. Whilst they consume the proteins, they are ingesting the amino acids in there, which contain the nitrogen. So again, we're seeing how ingestion, which is by humans and animals, they get their nitrogen and from the protein they eat. So guys, proteins, as I mentioned, are made up of amino acids. Amino acids, again, are your nitrogen-containing compounds. And these, again, form a crucial part of the building block of any organism as they develop muscle. As I mentioned, the decomposition, the process of decomposition relies on bacteria and fungi breaking down the proteins and amino acids from dead plants and animals. Decomposition is a significant process where the process of respiration occurs either with oxygen or without oxygen, and we refer to those as aerobic and anaerobic respiration. During these processes, the decomposers such as some bacteria and fungi utilize the remains of the organic material and return that back into the soil, and we see that these return the ammonium ions back into the soil. And that again is available to plants that use that for the process of growth and protein synthesis. The next process we're looking at is ammonification. Again, the broken down amino acids that are released during the process of decomposition is converted into ammonia by your decomposers. This image shows you the process of ammonification, where plants and animals that decompose during the process of their cycles of life. The bacteria in these, as I mentioned, the anaerobic and the aerobic bacteria utilize either oxygen or in the absence of oxygen, and they convert that during a process called ammonification into ammonium. And this ammonium, NH4+, is again available by nitrifying bacteria, which use these in the next process. So let's look at the word ammonification. Ammonia is also produced from amino acids when broken down by decomposers. So during the process of decomposition, the ammonia is broken and released from the breakdown of amino acids. Again, that is then available, as I mentioned, to your nitrifying bacteria. Nitrification, again, the next process, certain bacteria convert the ammonia into nitrates. This process of converting into nitrates is called nitrification, converting into nitrates. These are called nitrifying bacteria. As I mentioned earlier on, we've got these leguminous plants that basically have these nitrogen fixing bacteria in their root nodules, and these are able to absorb and convert that into nitrates. Okay, so denitrification is the opposite of nitrification. So there are other bacteria that convert the ammonia and nitrates into nitrogen and nitrous oxide, which is then released into the atmosphere. These are called the denitrifying bacteria. So as I mentioned, the nitrites and the nitrates are then broken down using bacteria, which are called your denitrifying bacteria, and these in turn release the nitrogen gas into the atmosphere, again cycling that back into the atmosphere. We see that again here, we're seeing the nitrifying bacteria as well as the denitrifying bacteria helping the nitrates and releasing them back into the atmosphere. So nitrogen fixation, again we mentioned these plants earlier on. Here we're looking at your leguminous plants. These are plants, as I mentioned, beans, bean plants and soya plants. They contain these nitrogen fixing bacteria which contain root nodules in which the bacteria live. These bacteria convert the nitrogen gas into nitrates. Again, that process can be illustrated here where we talk of atmospheric nitrogen being used by these root fixing bacteria and converting that into ammonia, which is then released and used by the plant as needed. So you can see here ammonium is used by the plants, and this ammonium is available for the process of protein synthesis. As I mentioned, here's the root of a leguminous plant. Again, these swellings are called root nodules, and within these root nodules you will find there are bacteria present, and these bacteria are able to, as I mentioned, take in the nitrogen from the atmosphere as a gas, and they're able to fix that, and that nitrogen is available. This association we refer to as a symbiotic relationship, because the plants benefit from housing these bacteria in the root nodules. The plant benefits from being able to use the ammonium ions and the nitrates fixed by these plants. The plants in turn make available carbohydrates which they produce by photosynthesis. So the sugar that is produced is then needed by the bacteria, and together that association ensures that the plant and the bacteria both benefit from that relationship. So if we look at the nitrogen cycle, we can see a series of events where we've got the nitrogen gas being fixed by your bacteria. We're seeing that the nitrogen again being released back into the environment by decomposers, which carry out a process of decomposition. We also looked at the nitrogen fixing soil bacteria, which take the nitrates and they produce ammonium. We also looked at the comparison between the nitrifying bacteria and your denitrifying bacteria, which again assist in releasing the atmospheric nitrogen into the atmosphere. It's important that we understand what is the human impact on the nitrogen cycle. As I mentioned, due to human activity, we have significantly influenced the balance of gases in the atmosphere. One such gas is carbon dioxide, which has led to global warming. Another is nitrogen. Let's see how nitrogen in excess can affect the environment. So the process called eutrophication occurs when excess nitrates enter aquatic ecosystems. We find that the nutrients come from sewage and fertilizer runoff from farms. So we know that during the process of agriculture, farmers tend to use artificial fertilizers which are rich in nitrogen. And that nitrogen is then going to run off when it rains or during irrigation into water bodies. And so you'll find that the nitrates and containing rich nutrients pass onto the water bodies surrounding these farms or these land masses where agriculture takes place. In the water, it's going to affect the quality of the water. We also recognize that sewage contains high amounts of nitrates, and these then enter water bodies. So here's an image that's showing you industrial runoff of sewage, which could be both animal or human, which ends up in water bodies. Over a period of time, this leads to a process called algal bloom. So again, algae are a type of photosynthetic plants that live in water that are able to use the nitrogen and carry out an accelerated rate of photosynthesis. This means that they now produce large amounts of oxygen, which is able to support life forms. However, we do know that what this means is that it produces a significant layer of algae over the surface of the water, something that you would have experienced when you've been to a dam or to a river alongside an industrial area or a farm. During that period, we see an excessive algal growth. And that algal growth, again, creates what we called a curtain over the water, where the water becomes turbid, in the sense blocking out the light from reaching further into the bottom of that water body. And this in turn means that the seaweed at the bottom does not get enough oxygen. So it cannot carry out an important process of respiration. Yes, photosynthesis might occur. Very unlikely because not enough sunlight, which then means that also these plants will die. If these are important in producing oxygen for other aquatic organisms, it means that now we're going to find that your other saprotrophs cannot survive, and so the other aquatic organisms start to die. And this leads to less dissolved oxygen in the bottom of the water, and in turn affects other aquatic organisms. So here's an image of an algal bloom, and this is again where the surface of this water body is covered with an elaborate blanket of algae. Again, below this, the ability of light to penetrate through is limited, and this in turn is going to affect the quality of organisms living in there. So eutrophication again is an increase in the nutrient supply within the waterways, which will result in severe ecological consequences, one of which is a rapid growth of algal population, which we refer to as algal blooms, which in turn results in an increased availability of nutrients. As the algae die, they will decompose, and this decomposition leads to larger quantities of dissolved oxygen, which then is leading to deoxygenation of the water supply. This in turn causes the death of fish and other aquatic organisms. It's important that we understand that this balance in nature is important to be maintained. So when the nutrient cycles do not function correctly, it leads to a negative consequence, which in turn can affect the climate and many organisms drastically. The climate is changing worldwide, and the Earth is becoming warmer. We've discussed that when we looked at the carbon cycle. The biggest cause of global worldwide warming is an increase in greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. Guys, it's important that we recognize that human impact has a significant effect on the various cycles. As we've looked at the carbon cycle and the nitrogen cycle, it's important that we understand that these are natural processes, and we need to strive to be able to maintain a balance of these. Simple things like reducing deforestation or reducing the use of artificial fertilizers can help contribute to maintaining the carbon cycle and the nitrogen cycle in balance. You guys have been a fantastic audience. I trust that you've enjoyed the lesson and have engaged with the topic. I wish you well. Hope to see you soon. Have a baie lekker day. Cheers.